Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee, by Presentation Group No. 7. For this presentation we have chosen to engage in a close reading of chapters 1, 2 and 5, as well as giving a brief overview of historical context and bibliographic information regarding J.M. Coetzee. Please be aware that this presentation will include themes of sexual violence as well as racial and gender discrimination.
J.M. Coetzee was born on the 9th of February 1940 in Cape Town to Afrikaner parents. He attended St Joseph's College, a Catholic school in the Cape Town suburb of Rondebosch. He studied mathematics and English at the University of Cape Town and received his Bachelor of Arts with Honours in English in 1960 and his Bachelor of Arts with Honours in Mathematics in 1961. He was said to be at the forefront of the anti-apartheid movement within Afrikaner literature and letters. In 1987, he spoke of the limitations of art in South African society, whose structures has resulted in deformed and stunted relations between human beings. Perhaps as an author who lived both during and after the South African apartheid, he is able to offer a more informed viewpoint to us as readers. Disgrace is a novel which addresses a number of issues regarding race, power and sexuality in post-apartheid South Africa.
To properly understand Coetzee's text, we have to first understand South Africa's colonial past, which began in the 18th century when Dutch Calvinist colonizers settled in South Africa. During the 19th century, in 1867, a 21.25 carat diamond named the Eureka Diamond is discovered in the Orange River in Hopetown, and this discovery spurs a diamond rush in South Africa, with British colonizing powers moving in to claim the newly profitable land from the Dutch, leading to the First and Second Boer Wars fought between 1899 and 1902. Both the British and Dutch colonies all but ignored the original black African inhabitants during these two wars, but allowed them to fight despite the Boer War being heralded as a white man's war, or the gentleman's war, due to it being comprised of two Caucasian parties. By 1900, in the 20th century, 90% of South Africa has been divided into colonies, and during the 1940s and 1950s, several laws are implemented with the intention of limiting the rights of black Africans, including the 1949 Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act, which was followed in the 60s and 70s with a rapid increase of militant protests and violence towards white Afrikaner people. In April 1980, the state of Rhodesia is renamed Zimbabwe, having gained independence from the British. A mostly black government is established, followed by mass migration of white South Africans out of the country. Coetzee's book is written in 1999, the same year as South Africa's second non-racial general election and 5 years after the official end of apartheid, although racial tensions still exist until this day.
In Chapter 1 we are immediately introduced to the idea of exploitation of the colonies. We are told that David has solved the problem of sex rather well. David's solution is to exploit non-white women for his own sexual satisfaction. The idea of exploitation is further highlighted when the narrator describes it as a pity that the escort agency should get such a large cut of Saraya's earnings. When Saraya refuses to do business with David any longer, the agency offers him lots of other exotics. The use of the word exotics rather than the phrase exotic women, for example, is important. The women are treated like commodities and are reduced only to their ability to supply a fetishized sexual experience due to their foreignness. This is also highlighted in the phrase, "He spends the evening with another Saraya." The women are stripped of their identities, and this once again proves the exploitative nature of colonialist ideologies. When David attempts to have a relationship with Dawn, he he ends up being turned off by her willingness to perform sexually. Chapter 1 says, she works herself into a froth of excitement that in the end only repels him. David is turned off by a woman who is overtly sexual. He prefers women like Soraya who are quiet and docile. The colonial woman is obedient and submissive. This is part of David's fantasy as a man taking on the role of the colonizer. Disgrace has been accused of racism, of feeding national hysteria, and of reflecting white anxieties in the post-apartheid context. These anxieties may include those reflected in David's life during Chapter 1. David's decline in power due to South Africa's political changes is highlighted. He realises that Soraya does not belong to him. After Soraya rejects David over the phone, he is left feeling unsettled. Chapter 1 says, her shrillness surprises him. Soraya is able to reject him, and this catches him off guard. He doesn't like the idea that his race no longer grants him inherent power. Another character that highlights this is Dawn. She says, you people had it easier. I mean, whatever the rights and wrongs of the situation, at least you knew where you were. You people, he says. What people? I mean your generation. Now people just pick and choose which laws they want to obey. It's anarchy. How can you bring up children when there's anarchy all around? Dawn makes a reference to the current political climate of South Africa. This further enforces the idea that the time after the apartheid period was unsettling in regards to race relations and how they would change. It is clear that white South Africans were beginning to feel the loss of their colonial power.
Chapter 5 concerns itself largely with the imperial patriarchal power of European colonizers as represented by David Lowry. At this stage of the book, we learn that Melanie has dropped out of university to concentrate on activities with her theatre group. However, both the reader and character David realise the real reason is the inappropriate relationship he has undertaken with her. When Melanie's father says, "We don't want her to throw away all these years for nothing," we might be able to infer colonial superiority and what Kipling phrased as the white man's burden, with the supposed patriarchal protection and development of the South African colonies being thrown away with the possibility of independence, and later the mass migration of white South Africans from the homelands, resulting in anxieties over the sustainability of the country after a deliberate attempt on the part of the colonial state to directly intervene to provide the order necessary for sustained economic growth. David responds to Melanie's father's request of help by internally thinking, "How can I help you when I am the very source of your woes?" David acknowledges that he has caused issues by engaging in a relationship with Melanie, in the same way as the Dutch and British colonies were the source of woes for South Africa. When David asks himself how he could help Melanie and her family, Coetzee recognizes the failings of the colonial system to provide stability. Ultimately, however, David Lorry does not act remorseful at all, and when he is eventually made aware of the harassment case being brought against him, he responds with, "Excuse me, I have business to attend to." David is dismissive of the accusations of harassment, and this reflects the relationship between European colonizers and South Africa, where issues relating to the abuse of power were not taken notice of until legal action and violence had already begun. Furthermore, David does not recognize the true nature of his manipulation of Melanie. When imagining Melanie signing her statement with both their names, he uses the terminology, "two in a bed, lovers, no longer but foes." David still sees his manipulation of Melanie as romantic, and has proven that he does not believe that his actions were rape, simply undesired. He can only see rape as what black men do to white women, an attitude which ultimately exposes him as a white anachronism of the colonial era. We later discover that, having heard of Professor Lorry's exploits, students have organized protests to support recent victims, which mirrors the feelings of dissent felt in South Africa under an apartheid regime, when the young country of South Africa rebelled against their teachers in uprisings such as that in Soweto, as you will see on the screen on your right. Later in the text, David's ex-wife describes the harassment case as an inglorious end to your career. David is losing control and power over Melanie, who represents the colonial state of South Africa, and is similarly at the cusp of losing his reputable career as a lecturer, a metaphor for how the British Empire began to crumble in the 20th century. Thank you for listening to us during this presentation. Lastly, we have some questions for the class, which will also be on the handout which you have been given. What similarities and differences are there between the two females, Melanie and Lucy, and the subsequent assault of each? How are the city and countryside of South Africa shown, and what could this represent? Why does David's relationship to the animals which he helps to euthanize change? How is race addressed in this text as a whole? And what is the relevance of David studying Wordsworth and writing an opera on Byron, and why does he find working on this so difficult?